Greetings, friends around the world. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Bible News Prophecy channel. Are investors about to face the four horsemen of the apocalypse? Well, why do I say such a thing? Well, we know about the four horsemen of the apocalypse. They're from the book of Revelation chapter 6, and we'll get to that later. But based upon stock market volatility around the world, Albert Edwards, who's with Societe Generale, which is a French-based multinational banking financial services company, made a variety of interesting comments. So I'd like to read some of what he had to say. Equity investors are facing the four horsemen of the apocalypse thundering towards them. Let me just stop there. The four horsemen of the apocalypse are starting to thunder toward us, but not really the way Albert Edwards had to say. But continuing, he said, out in front leading the charge is surge in U.S. bond yields, but close on its heels is the escalating trade war and the instability in emerging market currencies. The final but probably most unpredictable horseman is the current face-off between the Italian government and European Commission on Italy's budget deficit. And that's something people haven't been paying much attention to, but there is an argument going on right now between Brussels, basically, and the leaders in Italy. Now, if this wasn't graphic enough, Edwards actually compares what lies in store for stock investors to the fiery deaths that affected the people in Pompeii after Mount Vesuvius blew up. So let me read some more of Albert Edwards' comments. It's all very well to say that the victims of Pompeii and Herculaneum should have heeded the warning signs in the weeks leading up to the devastating eruption in 79 AD. But equity investors might be ignoring similar early warning signs that the bond market is giving. After 12 hours huddled in beachside boathouses, the refugees from Herculaneum had probably assumed the worst was over. Vesuvius had been erupting all day. Apart from the hail of pumice, there seemed to be no obvious danger. Yet, as the 300 men, women, and children sat in semi-darkness debating whether to return to their homes or flee down the coast, a scorching cloud of superheated volcanic ash burst into the crowded shelters. They were instantly fried alive. Well, we're seeing various signs that Jesus referred to in Matthew 24, and I'll get to that a little bit later. But people decided, really nothing, big deal, the worst is over, etc. I mean, that's what Albert Edwards was saying about the people in Vesuvius, because of Mount Vesuvius blowing up over in Pompeii. According to the news article, it says, Edwards' recommendation, when you see a volcano erupt next to you, you run. Well, stock prices go up and down. And as far as four horsemen of the apocalypse, it's got really nothing to do with the stock market thing. But interestingly, there was an article a while back called The Four Horses of the U.S. Debt Apocalypse. And basically, it says the four were student loans, which were $1.3 trillion, subprime auto loans, which are over $1 trillion, credit card debt, which is over $1 trillion, and 99% of corporate cash debt ratios were poor. It says these four horses of debt, galloping toward us simultaneously from different sectors, don't sign any sign of slowing. They will trigger the U.S. debt apocalypse, bringing more defaults, vast job cuts, and economic fallouts even greater than the Great Recession. Well, that was a particular claim. Well, if you look at Bible prophecy doesn't specifically tie the four horsemen of the apocalypse to debt or equities, but it essentially does tie the start of the Great Tribulation in with it, although it doesn't use those particular terms. Now, I'd like to use the English Standard Version of the Bible, and I'd like to read from the book of Habakkuk chapter 2, and I'd like to start reading in verse 2 from Habakkuk. And the Lord answered me, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so he may run who reads it. So similarly to Albert Edwards' comment, you see a volcano erupting, you run. God is telling Habakkuk to tell people, when you see what's going on, you need to run or take steps. Continuing in verse 3. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. So we're talking about a prophecy actually for the time of the end, or the appointed time of the end, as it says in, for example, the New King James Version of the Bible. But people, will they pay attention to what's going to happen? Well, let's go down to verse 6. Shall not all these take up their taunt against him with scoffing and riddles for him, and say, woe to him who heaps up what is not his own? For how long? And loads himself up with pledges. What is this talking about? Pledges, debt, like U.S. Treasury bills. In the 4 horses of the apocalypse, according to one article, they didn't even mention the U.S. national debt, which is over $21 trillion and continues to increase. This is something that people should be paying attention. It's sort of like Mount Vesuvius erupting, or you can start to see the beginnings of Mount Vesuvius erupting. The more the U.S. increases its debt, the closer we're getting to this particular time. And how do we know it's got to do with debt? Well, pledges are debt, but let's continue in verse 7. Will not your debtors suddenly arise, and those who wake you make you tremble? Then you will be spoiled for them. Because you've plundered many nations, all the remnant of the people shall plunder you. For the blood of man, the violence to the earth, to cities, and all who dwell in them. Essentially, you've got the arrogance of political leaders who think it's okay to continue to increase the debt of the United States. And for those of you who are in the United States, this is not an anti- or pro or anti-Republican or Democrat position, because both the Republican and Democratic administrations have been doing that. Debt is not a good thing. Some bad things are going to happen. And what's going to happen when the creditors rise up, basically that's going to be the start of the Great Tribulation. Now, however, that doesn't start until the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are beginning their rides. So let's prove this a couple different ways. First, let's go to the book of Matthew chapter 24, and I'm going to go back to the New King James Version of the Bible, or I'm going to use the New King James Version of the Bible. Starting in verse 3. Now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? So this is a question from the disciples to Jesus. So what did Jesus say? Let's start looking at verse 4. Jesus answered and said to them, take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. Okay, so he's talking about false religious leaders. Well, what's this got to do with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse? Well, if you go to the book of Revelation chapter 6, we're going to read a couple of verses there, starting in verse 1. Now I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying with a voice like thunder, come and see. And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. This white horse has to do with a false religion. It's white, so it looks good. The Apostle Paul warned that Satan's ministers look like angels of light, ministers of righteousness. So this first horse is not ridden by Jesus, but essentially represents the ecumenical religion that's going to take over the world. And right now we're seeing more and more signs that this particular horseman apparently started to ride already. And this ride will accelerate as more religions actually get together with the interfaith and ecumenical movements that are being promoted by the United Nations, the World Council of Churches, the Vatican, and various religious leaders, both in the East and in the West. Now back to Matthew, more words from Jesus. Now we go to verse 6, and you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. So I'm going to stop right there. This ties in with the next horse of the book of Revelation, or the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. We go to verse 3 of Revelation chapter 6. It says, when he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, come and see. Another horse, fiery red, went out, and it was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth, that people should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword. Again, this is consistent with what Jesus warned about in Matthew chapter 24. Now let's go, and we're going to read just a small part now of Matthew 24. This is going to be part of verse 7. And there will be famines. I'm going to stop right there. If you go back to Revelation chapter 6, we learn about the third horse. It says, verse 5, when he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. Do not harm the oil and the wine." This is talking about a time of food shortages, famine. Not that there's no food whatsoever, but the food will be very expensive. Essentially, you get a quart of wheat for a full day's work. Or 3 quarts of barley for a full day's work is essentially what they're talking about here. And this is a time of famine. Again, this is consistent with what Jesus was saying. Now let's go back to Matthew chapter 24 and continue with verse 7. And we'll back up again. It says, "And there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows." Well, if we go back to Revelation chapter 6, starting in verse 7, we see, when he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of a fourth living creature saying, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and the name of him who sat on it was called Death, and Hades followed with him. And power was given to them to kill a fourth of the earth, to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth. Well, with death, we could include things such as earthquakes, which we just read about, but the beasts of the earth, we're talking about pestilences. Now, Jesus called these the beginning of sorrows. Why is this relevant? It's relevant because the beginning of sorrows happened before the Great Tribulation. If you go back to Matthew chapter 24, and after the beginning of sorrows, verse 8, talking about there's going to be a tribulation, persecution. Verse 14, we see the gospel of the kingdom will be preached to the world as a witness. Verse 15, Jesus talks about the abomination of desolation being set up. Then down in verse 21, "For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. Unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened." Now that comes after the ride of the 4 horsemen. But the ride of the 4 horsemen is much more important than basically what happens to the stock market day to day. But I find it interesting that we see an investor or an advisor out in Europe saying, look, some things don't look good for the financial markets, and this could be really bad. And we had a writing from the United States saying, with all the debt issues in the United States, there are 4 horsemen of the debt apocalypse. And you tie this in with prophecies such as Habakkuk chapter 2, talking about an end coming to an indebted nation. Hopefully all these things make some sense to you. Now, by the way, the most indebted nation of all time in the history of humanity is, yeah, that's right, the United States of America. A power that is offending people with its trade policies, currency issues, and other things right now. So while equity markets are not really related to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in a direct biblical sense, the point Albert Edwards made, when you see things happening at Mount Vesuvius, you should take steps. The Bible warns when you see things happening, you also should take steps. And we're seeing the U.S. debt continue to increase, and it will continue to increase, and the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse will complete their ride. The Great Tribulation will start. And by the way, for those who are in places like the United States, you're going to find that that particular country will be destroyed. Take care of your spiritual life now. Don't wait until it's too late. Don't be like the people in Pompeii and Herculaneum who thought that they were all fine. Pay attention to the signs. As Jesus said in Mark chapter 13, what I say to you all, watch. And we are seeing things to watch right now going on in the world that are going to lead to the end time like the Bible predicts. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Bible News Prophecy Channel.